Really, really amazing topic. One that I love because it's very Indo-European. The origins of the Indo-Europeans. And we've had some fantastic data coming through. Very Indo-European. The origins of the Indo-Europeans. And we've had some... Sorry about that. But they have a question of why. There's a question come up from this new data from Harvard. So they've come up with a paper called The Genetic Origin of the Indo-Europeans, and they're walking back some of the stuff they said in a paper they released in 2022, which I did this drive talk on, called Southern Arc. And I did a stream on Southern Arc theory where I put forward a lot of my objections to the claims within. I was polite about it. I did think it was actually a good paper and interesting, but I just didn't agree with the stuff they were saying. Some people said I was coping and all kinds of things, but I wasn't coping. I was right. Just a second. Take off this hoodie. I was right about so much, and now I've been vindicated by a lot of what I said in that stream. We'll go into that today. There's actually been two papers, but I can't really go over both of them. But they both cover the same thing, and they're both from the same people. And this people are mostly the same ones involved in the Southern Arc thing. But it seems to me that the named author, Lazaridis, isn't 100% giving up on his old idea, but that this paper, which collaborates with the Reich Lab and Reich's team collaborate with David Anthony, a renowned archaeologist who knows all about Indo-European stuff and has been saying for years and years and years before all the DNA stuff came, that the Kurgan steppe cultures are the origin of the Proto-Indo-European. And I think his influence has encouraged them probably to walk back some of the rather outlandish claims about a southern homeland south of the Caucasus for the Proto-Indo-European languages. And it does seem that Lazaridis is the member of that team who wants to hold on to that idea. Now, yeah, as I said, it's not that I do sometimes get annoyed because of really crazy claims, but Lazaridis' claims and the team's claims from the Southern Arc paper aren't the really crazy ones. The ones that I get really angry with aren't theirs, but the ones that kind of combine the claims which I thought were unsubstantiated about a southern homeland, because the DNA doesn't show that, and now we're shown in this new paper that Indo-European languages in Anatolia are because of steppe invasions into Anatolia. Now that's known, so there's no need for us to talk about Hittites not having steppe DNA, because they do have steppe DNA, and Hittite languages are originating in people from Ukraine and southern Russia. So that's not a problem anymore. But there was this other paper from Hegarty and colleagues which was making some ridiculous claims about Indo-European languages being much older than they possibly could be. And then some people combine Hegarty with the Southern Arc stuff to make even a crazy, ridiculous idea that the Proto-Indo-European language speakers were actually not a single race, but a sort of continuum of very, very distantly related genetic groups, from the Bactrian archaeological complex in Asia to the Caucasus hunter-gatherers, who are completely different phenotypically and culturally, and there's no common material culture, and with the Iranian Neolithic farmers in the middle. And they're trying to say that's somehow the homeland, but that cannot be supported by any archaeological or genetic model, really. It's just like a very, very deep cope for chauvinists who just for some reason cannot accept that the Proto-Indo-European languages are European. They're really just a Paleo-European language that's spread out of Neolithic Europe, which is what is absolutely certain now. Now, I'm going to go over what the different people claim, but I just wanted you to understand that wherever the different sources come for these steppe peoples, it is absolutely unquestioned now, everyone's certain that the dispersion of all Indo-European languages comes from Europe. So they dispersed out of Europe. And even if, as Lazaridis is still trying to cling to, maybe some pre-Proto-Indo-Anatolian ancestral language of which we can't even reconstruct, came from outside Europe, south of the Caucasus, which I don't think is true anyway, because it's going to come from either from one of the hunter-gatherer groups that formed the Proto-Indo-European races on the steppe, And that includes Western hunter-gatherers, Eastern hunter-gatherers, the mixed Western and Eastern hunter-gatherers in Ukraine, rather, and also some Caucasus hunter-gatherers. But that's irrelevant, really, because that's not Proto-Indo-European. That's not the ancestral language. Whatever it is, the language that all the Indo-European families come from is the one that was spoken in Ukraine, and that's dispersed out of Ukraine by a European group. So it's just correct to say that the Proto-Indo-European family is a European language family that spread from Europe, by European people. Yeah, there's no question of that. So just ignore all the sort of third world chauvinists who want to pretend that they don't have any, cultural ancestral ties to Europe, because if you come from an Indo-European language group in India or Iran or wherever it is in the world, ultimately it goes back to the steppe in Europe. Now, if you want to know about all this stuff, it all began in the 18th century with a language question, and then from there, in the 19th century, archaeology got involved, and the evidence has been gathering up and all the different theories, and it's actually a fascinating history of this academic tradition of arguing about where the homeland is. Now, obviously, it's completely been shaken to pieces since 2015 by really strong genetic evidence that has given the archaeological evidence support and shown that the Kurgan hypothesis, which actually is first suggested in the 19th century by, but there's an Englishman who suggested it, but I think there may have been a Russian who suggested it even earlier. But the South Russian origin, is very old now. It's from the 19th century, and it's obviously true now. That's what this paper is showing. So, but if you want to know about that, I can recommend a book that would be worth a read. And it's basically Alain de Benoit, The Indo-Europeans in Search of the Homeland, is a book which goes over basically the history of this academic argument. But if you haven't got time to read it, which a lot of people don't these days, especially since it's going over the arguments that are now mostly proven wrong by different peoples, you can get a quick version of it, from a website I love called Legend. Legend is kind of like a non-woke version of Blinkist. And if you don't know what that means, it's a condensed version of books. It's got if you get a subscription to this website, you get all different books, non-fiction books, condensed into much more manageable and quick versions. So non-fiction books consist of 20% new info and about 80% known info. And you only really want to know what the original information is. So this just gets to the meat of the matter. Furthermore, there's so much information out there. So this is a pre-selection of well-curated content. So you're going to get good books, access to good books, and not woke books, because the people who run this are proper academic-minded people. And Legend really shine through in this sense, because it gives you essential new original ideas, as well as other traditional academic ideas that are fallen out of fashion. And 20% that fresh info from the books, condensed into 25 minutes or less. So you can get a crash course in the history of the Indo-European research from pre-genetic era, of the over 100 years of academia in 25 minutes. And it's not like a mainstream, their competition where they try and inject political correctness or remove all the bits they don't like to try and present a political version of a text. It's just the texts. So you can listen as a podcast kind of thing, or listen to it spoken, or you can read it if you prefer, or you can do both at the same time to help you absorb the information. If you don't like the service, there's a 7-day money-back guarantee. So it's really, what's there to lose? It's a brand new service, run out of Germany. I really recommend it. And look, I'll just show you. You can click on the chapters that you want to look at. So I want to go the archaeology and linguistic paleontology, then go to chapter. And then I got this whole chapter condensed in a very short way, and I can press play if I want to listen to it in this podcast form as well. So highly recommend legend.com, and you can actually click on the link in the description if you're on YouTube, if you want to access that website and have a look and get up to speed with all this bloody history before the genetics. And then you can understand a bit about why this new genetic stuff is so important, because it's really vindicating the Victorian, well, not just Victorian, but everything up until the Second World War. From around the mid 19th century, people started to move towards a European homeland. The Germans were very keen on an Asian homeland. Even the Nazis kept pushing for an Asian homeland. But the clever people were like, nah, it's not an Asian homeland. It's a British homeland. It's a European homeland. And a British person was, I think, a first or second to suggest a South Russian homeland. You can learn exactly who the names of the people are in that book. Now, here's the paper, The Genetic Origin of the Indo-Europeans, as you can see here. And there's a lot of authors on there. Lazaridis is the first. David Anthony is the third. And he, I think, is the guy pushing things in the right direction. Wright's put himself at the end, but he's obviously the head of the team. Now, we'll go over as much as I can in an hour, basically. This is huge discoveries in the world of Proto-Indo-European origins, and it's kind of reaffirming what the first big genetic paper was saying in 2015, that the Steppe and the Yamnaya are very crucial for understanding it. But previously, only enthusiasts on the internet, like myself, have been trying to say that, please look at Sredny Stog. Sredny Stog is ancestral to Yamnaya in all probability. It's older than Yamnaya. It's certainly archaeologically ancestral and has influence on Yamnaya. It's the same general genetic group. It's the same region. It's got many of the same customs. It's obviously going to be, because Yamnaya is too late to be early Proto-Indo-European. So it's got to be something a bit earlier, and that is Sredny Stog. And if you want to have a Proto-Indo-Anatolian language with Proto-Indo-European as a separate branch from Anatolian, fine, you can just say Stog's that too. So I'm a big Stog advocate and have been for years now. And this paper finally looks properly at Sredny Stog as a major candidate, and as a result, we make some great progress. Now, as I said before, many of my complaints about the Southern Arc theory from my live stream in August 2022 have been vindicated. You can go back and watch that stream. The paper focuses now on 3 different genetic Clines. Now, I'll try and show you what Cline means, because it refers to a PCA, a principal component analysis chart, which plots data in a kind of way that you would see this sort of thing happening. Each dot is a specific in a sample, an ancient sample. And you can see from the way they're distributed how they're related to each other. And they can form clusters, which means they're all genetically similar. And they can form and then between clusters, you can get a Cline, showing that the different far apart clusters have intermediate populations who are linking them. They're related to both sides of the Cline. And that shows that there's gene flow going along those Clines, up and down, like this. To give you an idea, one of them is called the Volga Cline. They start off with saying, I should say, they've got this thing CLV. So CLV is where they're saying the real core Indo-European race, if not language as well, but they think language too, is formed. But CLV means Caucasus Lower Volga. Now, to give you to show you where the map, it's a bit complicated. I'm just trying to assume that you don't have much knowledge of it. Then the Volga is an important river that goes, it's really long, and it goes all the way from the Caspian. It empties into the Caspian, but it starts all the way up here, way out by as far north as Latvia, up in northern Russia. So it links northern Europe with, not only with the Caucasus, but it's been a way for like the Vikings, for example, to trade with people in the Middle East. So it's really linking the far north of the human world with the major Mesopotamian civilization. So it's very long. Now the CLV, they're talking about L Lower Volga, so this area down here, and where it matches up with the Caucasus. Now that's actually the map doesn't show, but that's actually a huge area with lots of diversity in it. Of course, the Caucasus are dominated by the CHG signal of Caucasus hunter-gatherer, whereas the further up the Volga you go, the more Eastern hunter-gatherer you get, which is a more Europoid type, very robust. But there's also, in this other map, I want you to see many other huge river systems in the Western Steppe. The Don, actually now connected to the Volga with a canal, comes down here. Then to the west of the Don, the Donets, and then the Dnieper, which they use in the new paper now. Instead of, they're using like Ukrainian words whenever there's a thing in Ukraine, even though the convention in English is to use the Russian because of the influence of Soviet archaeology. So I say things like I've always said Dnieper and Sredny Stog. They're calling it Sredny Stih. I don't know how to pronounce Ukrainian. I think that's how. So Sredny Stih is Sredny Stog, and Dnipro and Ustavo becomes Ustaver. So yeah, it's a little bit confusing because that's the convention in England has been to use Russian, but because of the situation with the war, they're being a bit sensitive to the feelings of Ukrainian people. So yeah, then the Bug and the Dniester. Now, the river systems, prior to the invention of steppe pastoralism, the habitation of the steppe was very much concentrated on the rivers. You didn't have like lots of hunter-gatherers like out on the steppe, and the introduction of wagons and cattle and domestication of horses by Sredny Stog, by the way, because the earliest horse riding evidence is not Yamnaya, it's Sredny Stog. So Sredny Stog were the first to ride horses, and that just opens up the steppe, so they're no longer tied to these rivers. But the fact that the Clines that this paper identifies are relative to rivers is important, because it's actually the rivers were like the Nile in Egypt. Like everyone was living along the Nile in Egypt now. The steppe was not an easy place to live for a hunter-gatherer before, but once you have pastoralism, the steppe suddenly becomes this lush ocean of fodder to feed your cattle and make food and make dairy, instead of just basically a grassy desert. So here's the Caucasus Lower Volga Cline. At the bottom of it, you've got CHG here, and Iran Neolithic, who are not the same, but like they are related to it. They're just outside the Cline a bit. South Caucasus, that's just Iranian, I think. And then at the bottom, on the other side of the Caucasus, after a gap, you've got Mesopotamian, Middle Eastern peoples. Anatolian European farmers from the other side of Anatolia, who entered Anatolia from the West Anatolia, then have a slight cline here with European farmers, because European Neolithic farmers are just the same as Anatolians, but with a bit of Western hunter-gatherer. So that brings them a bit up this way. So this PCA, by the way, is mirrored. It's mirrored backwards. So right is west and left is east, which is annoying, but yeah. So the other Cline, the Cline at the top of the Caucasus Lower Volga Cline, you've got the Lower Volga people who are close to the Yamnaya. So this red group here is Yamnaya, and there's this new group, BP group here, which are very important now, and probably ancestral to Yamnaya, because they're so close to Yamnaya, as you can see. Although there's some disagreement on this, but anyway, the next Cline you've got is the Dnipro Cline, up the Dnieper, and the Dnieper ends with. So on one end you've got these like people with, on the European end of the Caucasus Lower Volga Cline, who have less CHG, aka the Yamnaya end, and the Yamnaya on a Cline also with going towards UNHG, who are hunter-gatherers from Ukraine, Neolithic Ukraine, who are a mixture of Western hunter-gatherers from Western Europe and Eastern hunter-gatherers from Eastern Europe. Whereas there's another Cline on the Volga going up from the Lower Volga to the Upper Volga, where you get more and more EHG, because up the top of the Volga in Russia, there's no Western hunter-gatherer at that time. It's just more pure EHG. So there's these Clines by the rivers. It's a little bit convoluted, but that's what they base. That's how you've got to understand it. It's all about these river systems. So, the Sredny Stog is identified as being ancestral to Yamnaya, as I've said it is for a long time, and also as having more ancestry from the western Dnieper Cline, which includes the WHG admixture. So where is Sredny? SS means Sredny Stog here. So you've got this sort of bluey triangle and square here. The red Yamnaya is down there, and the next ones up the Dnieper Cline are the Sredny Stog, who are ancestral to Yamnaya. So it might be like Yamnaya are like related to the BP group, and the Sredny Stog. We'll get into that later. Anyway. And we also now know from the paper, as I said, that Anatolians, because previously said, the steppe can't be the original although all Indo-European speakers in the world, in Asia and Europe, all descend from these steppe herders, like Yamnaya. The Anatolian speakers don't, so that's why they made up all the stuff in 2022 about there was an earlier Proto-Indo-Anatolian language, which was spoken by people who weren't the steppe group, and then the steppe group is just the Proto-Indo-European break off of that, and the original Proto-Indo-Anatolians were just like an unsampled Armenian population with like very CHG-like ancestry, but not CHG. Well, now we know that the Central Anatolian Hittites did have ancestry from what's probably Sredny Stog or Yamnaya, they say, but yeah, I think likely said Sredny Stog to be, in my opinion. So, the Southern Arc hypothesis, as it was previously presented in 2022, is no longer tenable, and the steppe hypothesis is proven. Not only, they were never denying the steppe hypothesis as the steppe as the main vector of all Indo-European languages, but they were trying to exclude Anatolian, and that's no longer possible. So now all Indo-European language groups are steppe mediated. There's no question of that. But there's an apparent disagreement between contributing authors. And David Antides is a steppe advocate, but the named author, Joseph Lazaridis, still maintains, and he's talking about this more on Twitter rather than the paper, but he's going on Twitter, still trying to push his, Bernie can still win, the ultimate origin is from the south, he thinks, and although this paper isn't really presenting that as the most likely scenario, it's still there as an option. But he's really pushing like this Mesopotamians, something with a Sumer Cline that isn't there, really. The lower Volga Cline, I guess, does go towards Mesopotamia. But, there ain't no cure for the Sumer Cline blues. That paper is also showing that Yamnaya descend directly. The Yamnaya descend directly from Sredny Stog. The corded ware origin is not shown in this paper; it's still unknown. But I think it's still likely Sredny Stog, and Sredny Stog had variable ancestry, so they're not all the same. As you can see on the Dnipro Cline, there's a spread. But Lazaridis on Twitter is still claiming, as he has for a while, that based on mainly on a few different things, but mainly on IBD descent, identity by descent sharing, the length of the segments that are shared, that the corded ware culture is not a cousin of Yamnaya, but a son of Yamnaya, daughter of Yamnaya, and even though the Y lineages are not supportive of that. So he's saying that's just because corded ware comes from like a previously like peasant Yamnaya population, or like underclass of Yamnaya who had an uprising and then took over, because that's why R1A is not dominant in Yamnaya but is very dominant in corded ware. So I think that's just not good enough, really. I'm still thinking it's possible. It's not proven. I think the origin, there's absolutely no question now that if Yamnaya comes from Sredny Stog, then corded ware comes from Sredny Stog as well, because the only question is corded ware directly from Sredny Stog, or is it via Yamnaya, or is it some kind of combination? Like there was a break-off from Sredny Stog, and then there were some Yamnaya descendants who merged with that break-off, and that's why it would be a little bit more complicated. But they're all roughly the same race in the sense they're all that same group: corded ware, bell beaker, Yamnaya, Sredny Stog. And they spread. I mean, I can show you actually, like, before I go too much into this, like, I've said before that this is my model for that's Sredny Stog here. And then they spread and become Yamnaya. The Yamnaya territory is much bigger. And then from there, you get this breakaway of Yamnaya into Asia called the Afanasyevo. That was it. And then from there, you get the corded ware breaking out. Is it from Yamnaya in this map? But it could have been an earlier breakout. And then the corded ware goes further into Fedorovo and Battle Axe in Scandinavia. And then from the western end of the corded ware, you get this Beryl Beaker into Western Europe. So that's the model I've supported for years. And it's pretty much, I mean, it's some bits tweaking here and there, but it's pretty much on the money, I think. And yeah, to just let you know what the Yamnaya looked like, I did these reconstructions here of two different Yamnaya, an eastern and a western one, with different like complexions, because there's a range of complexions. There was as dark as this one and as light as this one. So all of them were sort of like on the spectrum of Europeans. Some look like Southern European spectrum, and some like this. They were all quite bulky kind of people. They don't look exactly like most Europeans do today, because we've got much more Anatolian Neolithic farmer ancestry with the farmer, and also we've been farming for so long that it's made us a bit more gracile. You can see my skull is like more narrow compared to these people. So, but yeah, they were robust. You occasionally see people like this all over Europe, like Britain, Russia, lots of places. But yeah, that's vaguely what they look like. Europoid. They're European people. They came from Europe, and Proto-Indo-European languages are a European phenomenon, and they spread from Europe. That is now, finally, we can like stop people saying that this is like, you know, a theory or whatever. Like it's pretty much established. Like you can't really go seriously against it. It's big cope now to go in any other direction. So they show that Yamnaya is not just a mix of a CHG mixed Middle Don population with an additional influx of CHG like population as previously claimed. And that additional influx they were claiming it included a Levantine portion. This is what they're saying in 2022. And I was just like, no one else was coming up with these models. It was a bit weird. I mean, their models weren't reliable 100% because they were saying that you can't model Anatolians with steppe ancestry, but now they're saying actually you can, which is what everyone, like the amateurs, were all telling them, like you can look, you can model Hittites with steppe ancestry, but that Yamnaya, they say that Yamnaya had, now they admit, have early European farmer admixture from Europe, as many amateurs have been saying. And in my Yamnaya documentary, I said you can't just model Yamnaya as CHG plus EHG. You've got to include a Western source as well, of European farmers with a little bit of Western hunter-gatherer, which, I mean, the Western hunter-gatherer can be from this Ukraine Neolithic hunter-gatherers, which have Western hunter-gatherer Clines. But yeah, they've got to have a bit of Western Anatolian in. There is evidence of some CHG flow. Oh no, sorry, I've got back. So they also say Yamnaya has additional Siberian sourced via the Volga hunter-gatherer admixture on top of the Don mediated EHG and CHG, River Don. So I can get you a little chart here which shows you get the map out the way. Right. What we got? So there's the Dnieper Cline, the Volga Cline. So you got like core Yamnaya here with this in red, and that's not showing it. But basically, there's like there's like a Central Asian source from coming down the Volga with extra, like they're calling it Central Asian origin, but there's another basically another source, basically, of extra EHG-like stuff, or extra ancient North Eurasian ancestry as well, coming in via Siberia at some point, like ancient Siberia. Which graphic is a good one to show? These show the different admixture on the Cline, basically. It's probably better to go and have a look yourself. If I show you some of these quotes, not in order, annoying. I've lost the order of my screenshots. So they're using Yamnaya as a source, which might not be a great idea, but they're saying Yamnaya and like Mykop were buried in Kurgans. Thus, the Kurgan burial rite was widespread 7,000 years ago among people of diverse ancestry from both edges and middle of the CLV Cline, suggesting that regardless of his ultimate origin and whether it was culturally adopted or spread by migration, it was common among people of the CLV. In contrast, a distinctive position of body on the back with knees raised and the floor of the burial pit covered with red ochre was shared by all the steppe groups, including Sredny Stog, groups on the Volga Cline and Yamnaya, while the Mykop burial position was contracted on one side. So Mykop is not doing... the Indo-European burials that we associate with Indo-Europeans, like the cultures for a long time after this, going well after the steppe, includes elements from different groups on the steppe that were drawn together. And that includes the red ochre, the pits, and the knees raised, and grave goods, and a barrow, or kurgan as they say, and it's a Turkic word used in Russia, but I think you should just use an Indo-European word like barrow, since they're Indo-European people. So barrows are definitely a good sign, but it's not clear how those come together yet from these. The steppe plus Mesopotamian class of model fits the Central Anatolian Bronze Age, does not fit any of the Chalcolithic Bronze Age Anatolian regional. Indicating we'll come to that later. So what else are we finding? They also say there is evidence of some late CHG flow, like the type they were talking about before, which they were calling Levantine-like DNA, which was like 1% Levantine or something, the way they modeled it, which was, I think, wrong. Which they're calling now Aknashan-like, which is an Armenian population. And they're finding this in Yamnaya, some Yamnaya, which would support Southern Arc, but it isn't at all viable as a candidate for Proto-Indo-Anatolian or Proto-Indo-European, since the common ancestry for Proto-Indo-Anatolian is now shown, they're talking about it being CLV. So the common ancestry you find in all the Indo-European cultures archaeologically now is CLV, not this Aknashan-like thing. So, which is found in some groups on the steppe, because not all population movements cause language changes. There was a quite complicated mixture of peoples on that region, because it's like an intersection of rivers, the edge of a mountain range that separates Europe from the Middle East. So, of course, you're going to get occasional like admixture from one to the other, but not all of them are going to be causing things. And certainly, I don't think this Aknashan-like ancestry could be the source of all of these huge changes, because there's no evidence of an Aknashan-like archaeological influence on these cultures that are going to be responsible for Indo-Europeans. The Yamnaya trace the majority of their ancestry to a Progress 2 related population, which they call BP group, whose habitation range spanned from the Lower Volga to the North Caucasus, the CLV region. And the newly identified BP group descended from East European hunter-gatherers and CHG and the ancient North Eurasian population in Central Asia. So that's where the Yamnaya were getting that extra A&E ancestry from, because it's in the BP group already. The paper models so-called core Yamnaya as Sredny Stog plus Yamnaya but I have some of my amateur my colleagues, other amateur enthusiasts of genetics like myself, prefer a simpler model, which we feel is more evidence archaeologically to support it. That core Yamnaya, as they're calling it in this paper, is just the BP group with extra European farmer and Ukraine Neolithic hunter-gatherer, shifting it to the west, like on, like I showed you, like here, look, there's Yamnaya, the red, there's the BP group, these green circles here, and if you get that green group and it gets a little bit of, you know, something to the west, I mean, it could be Sredny Stog, it could be something, yeah, like a little bit of Ukrainian Neolithic hunter-gatherer, but it's gone down a bit further as well to make it a bit southern. So, yeah, it's at the intersection of these Clines. So, anyway, the Hittites were successfully modelled as having 8 to 10% Yamnaya or Sredny Stog ancestry, which is a fair bit. That's enough to, you know, for an elite dominance model to explain how Anatolian languages came in, you know, like elite dominance model means something like, not like Anglo-Saxons as such, more like the Norman conquest, something like that happened in Anatolia. Confirming that Indo-European Anatolian languages originated in the steppe. And we can model the steppe ancestry in Anatolia as Sredny Stog. So in which case we can just go ahead and call Sredny Stog Proto-Indo-Anatolian, in my opinion. I don't think the paper says this, but yeah, I think you can just go ahead. Early Sredny Stog could be Proto-Indo-Anatolian. Late Sredny Stog is Proto-Indo-European. And then Yamnaya is late Proto-Indo-European. Nice and simple. That's what I would say. They don't say that though. But they've got like 4 proposed hypotheses for the Proto-Indo-Anatolian, annoying, stupid way of saying a European language to refer to India and Anatolia for a language that comes from Europe. But yeah, that's what it's called. The origin of this language family, they've got like A, B, and C, and there's 2 types of A East and A West. Let me just show you the graphic for this. It's quite interesting. So, tell me in the comments as well which one you think is the best. So you've got I'm 100% A West. So this is about how it got there. The paper does not, and Lazaridis as well, is saying on like there's not. The genetic evidence is not in favor of A West, he says. But you can show, and not in the paper doesn't go into this, but you can show how Sredny Stog ancestry goes from Sredny Stog here into a series of different archaeological cultures down the Balkans. That's been demonstrated in genetics. And then into the Istanbul Kurgans. There's some Kurgans by Istanbul and the Bosphorus, near the Bosphorus. And that's all in the timeline for Anatolian languages. So that would explain how that ancestry got there. But the paper doesn't support that. They're much more going for hypothesis A East, where instead the ancestry, the steppe people somehow came over the Caucasus, mixed with the Mesopotamian-like people, and then went westward into Anatolia. The merits of each theory is that the West one has some genetic evidence of Sredny Stog ancestry going westward through the Balkans, and there's also good archaeological evidence for that as well. And also the diversity of Anatolian languages is greater in the West. So you'd expect that to mean the west side of Anatolia is the origin, because there's not so much on the east. But they do have a pretty good argument to support their eastern thing, which is based on the fact that their central Anatolian like samples of Hittite people are dominated by all have Mesopotamian ancestry and are lacking in like extra European ancestry that the Sredny Stog would have picked up going via the Balkans. And this is why Lazaridis says he doesn't support a West. Yeah, it's still, I mean, they mismodeled Anatolia completely as having no steppe before. Now they're saying it does have up to 10% steppe. So I'm not sure if I'd say that they're just missing. I mean, also remember in 2018 they were saying there's no European farmer ancestry in Indian people with steppe ancestry. So it's like it can't be from a steppe source with European ancestry. But then they retracted that. Like, actually, there is European farmer ancestry. So yeah, it was Andronova. It was the source of the Aryans in India. But sometimes they make a mistake like that. So it's possible. I think they're just missing something, and there is extra Western ancestry in the Anatolians, so that the A-West theory works. But maybe there's a combined theory. I know some people who are telling me there is evidence of, and I don't know about this, but there's an archaeological argument as well I don't understand yet about some kind of diffusion from the steppe into the Armenia, which would be maybe a source for a hypothesis A East. Hypothesis B and C are basically variants of their old 2022 ideas about a southern arc, which is that, okay, so A is that like Proto-Indo-Anatolian is an Armenian or Anatolian language, and that the Proto-Indo-European languages just went up over the Caucasus, and that's where all Proto-Indo-European languages come from, except the Anatolians, which went from Armenia into Anatolia. And that was what they were pushing before, but it just doesn't work now, because we know that the Anatolians have steppe ancestry from north. So they should just abandon that. And then there's this hypothesis C, which is like a mixed version of it, which has like two versions of Proto-Indo-Anatolian, one above the north and one above the Caucasus and one below. So yeah, pretty convoluted, but I'd say, yeah, I'm all A West. What do you guys think? I'll look in the comments for a bit, and then I will see if there's any super chats or anything. Oh, thank you, one person super chat, Cherry Appleton. Very much appreciated, Cherry. I'll give you a heart for that. I can't see any actual... Oh yeah, another one from Lance Biggums. Where did these various steppe peoples come from before they were regarded as separate peoples' cultures? Descend from ancient North Eurasians? Well, Lance, I've just been sort of going over that, all these different groups. I think I've answered that already. But yeah, ancient North Eurasians are ancestral to many of... They're ancestral to... Obviously, there's extra A&E, I've said, in that one group. But you should know that Eastern hunter-gatherers and Caucasus hunter-gatherers already had A&E. So A&E is quite widespread. I think even WHG have A&E. So A&E is like already part of everything. So yeah. Oops, what's this one? Ian gets $5. What do you think of the Anatolian Indo-European languages not sharing words for cart and horse or having the same grammar? I don't actually have a great knowledge of Anatolian language vocabulary. I'm not sure what you're saying by Anatolian Indo-European. You mean just the Anatolian languages, I guess? But yeah, they obviously, it's quite clear, in my opinion, that Anatolian languages broke off at a very early date. Everyone agrees on that from the linguistic argument, but also in terms of like the archaic nature of the Anatolian languages, but also just like the vocabulary is missing some of the things. It came off at a time when the speakers were still quite primitive. And that's another thing like people don't understand, because like CHG are related as a population to Iran Neolithic, but Iran Neolithic is not the same race or culture. CHG are very primitive hunter-gatherer people, and they have like, quite robust skulls as well. Not like Iran Neolithic and like are farming people. So they're more like Anatolian farmers in that sense. They're going to be more gracile, and they have like settled communities. Like the CHG stuff on the steppe is not all, you shouldn't think of it as influence from a southern civilization, as they were trying to argue before. It's influence from a southern population who were no less primitive than the other hunter-gatherers on the steppe. in most cases. But there might be later introductions of people from the south who are connected to civilized Mesopotamian cultures as well. But yeah, CHG are like just another robust skull, primitive people. What else have we got here? Farming ruined us, someone says. I wonder how WHG and EHG are related. When did they split off and what location? I mean, I'm not going to go into Mesolithic. You're talking about like, actually, there's a really good video about that by Ginos Historia. He's done about like how the Epigravettian populations became influenced like Western hunter-gatherers and what, in a way, there's no such thing as WHG and EHG. In a way, it's just like, there is no like, these are two races or anything. That's how we understand it now to make it clear to people. But there's really a continuation, a Cline. So when people are talking about Clines, it's much more close to the reality on the ground. Like no one knew that there was a WHG, EHG split. And there probably wasn't just EHG language and WHG language. There's like probably loads and loads of languages in the WHG and the EHG, and also mixed populations in between, which we sometimes call SHG or UNHG or Baltic HG, but those are just genetic terms. Like it's not the same thing as archaeological cultures or something. So when we talk about Yamnaya, we're not talking about a genetic group. That's a archaeological culture identified by its burial types. Whereas when we say Western steppe herder, then we're talking about a genetic group which includes the Yamnaya archaeological culture. So yeah, it's watch Ginos Historia on YouTube, his video about the Mesolithic Europe, if you want to understand the origins of EHG and WHG and how in a way they don't really exist. They're just like continuations of earlier different European groups. Seamus Oblan says, God or gods be with the days when Grecian autism would continue to interpret West Eurasian, archaic incredulation and even African genetics papers, lol. Okay, I think he's referring to the fact that Lazaridis is Greek. James Melly, £5. Thank you both, Seamus and James. They model Yamnaya equals Sredny Stog plus CLV. I believe there is a critical CLV pop in Kalmykia, Volga Delta. Ludovic Orlando models wild Dom2 horse ancestors here. So, but in case you're not aware, the Dom2 horses are the first domestic horses from which all the world's domestic horses descend subsequently, all history. And they were first domesticated by Sredny Stog people. So if this Orlando is saying that Dom2, the wild ancestors of Dom2 came from that region, then it would support that idea that there's a critical population in that region of Kalmykia, but I don't know. In the Volga Delta, you say, huh? Interesting. Thank you for that comment, James. Now, here's a graphic showing some of the stuff going on in the region. So Mycop, there's a Mycop culture, which is like a settled population with higher CHG ancestry, less, it's more connected to, on the other side, the Caucasus hunter-gatherers is there, but also like and here's Aknashan, where the Armenian people are, and then so Mycop's more southern, it's more connected to the Middle Eastern populations on the other side of the mountains than all the populations here in Ukraine and in South Russia. But there's a steppe Mycop intermediary population who are obviously a mixture. And then up here you've got like Kvalinsk, which is a Western steppe herder population, so-called, which has a lot more EHG, a lot more hunter-gatherer. As you go further up the Volga, you're getting more and more EHG and less influence from the south. And as you go up the Dnieper, you're getting more and more Ukrainian Neolithic hunter-gatherer ancestry this way, towards Alexandria, Kopachiv, and Dervizka. And then these red dots everywhere are the Yamnaya samples that they got, core Yamnaya. So they're identifying a specific type of Yamnaya ancestry, which includes also samples from Afanasyevo, not just Yamnaya. And they say that all Yamnaya have ancestry from core Yamnaya, so that's why they call it core Yamnaya. And they're saying like understanding the formation, therefore, of core Yamnaya is the crucial thing to understanding Yamnaya. And they do model it as having Sredny Stog plus another population on this Cline. Here's the Cline here. The lower Volga Cline ends up here. And this is the CLV, Caucasus Lower Volga. That's enormous. I can't tell exactly how many miles that is. But I'm going to guess that's definitely more than 1,000 miles, isn't it? I'm just looking, I wish I had that GeoGuessr guy here. He'd just tell me immediately how long it is. But that's like longer than Britain for sure. That's like well over 1,000 miles. So, wow. That's a big... Don't think when they identify a CLV Cline that you're talking about a common cultural area, because that's a really, really big area. It's just a genetic Cline showing that there is gene flow along that river. Here is a interesting model, not from the paper, but done by an amateur enthusiast on the internet called Thultide. And he is using Vahaduo to model Ukraine. He's saying that look, here's got the Aknashan from Armenia that they're saying is so important. But he's just pointing out that it isn't, because this Russia-Kalmykia Yamnaya, 0. Kazakhstan Yamnaya, 0. Russia-Samara Yamnaya, 0. Ukraine Early Bronze Age Yamnaya, 0. And then one Russia-Caucasus, and right next to the Caucasus Mountains in the Early Bronze Age, 3%. So there's not a good reason to say Aknashan is important, or that like anything from the south of the Caucasus is important to understanding the Proto-Indo-Europeans. I really don't think the southern ideas have got any like merit. I got the feeling that Lazaridis is still going to cling to them for a bit, but I don't think his colleagues agree with him. But we'll see. We'll see. Here's some of the other archaeological cultures involved before 3000 BC. So Europe has here the globular amphora culture, which would be crucial for the formation of corded ware when the Yamnaya move west. And then down here you've got the Mycop, important southern culture on the edge of the Yamnaya land. Yamnaya dominating the steppe. Combed ware are EHG people up north. And there's, saying Mycop sphere of influence and the Gak sphere of influence. So the Yamnaya in between the settled spheres of influence of the globular amphora and the Mycop. And they're claiming maybe the Yamnaya had an intermediary role, I guess, from that map. But Cucuteni Tropilia is also extremely important, and they're not on that map for some reason. And they are in there as well. I'm not sure why they didn't put them on the map. And Catacomb, here's a later after 3000 BC. Catacomb culture is just a late form of Yamnaya. It's not different in a genetic sense. It's the core area of the Yamnaya culture has this variant burial called catacomb culture, because Yamnaya means pit, but some of them develop their pits into catacombs, hence catacomb culture. And they are the origin of the Greeks. Pretty sure that's the case. The movement into Greece that formed the Greek language came from the catacomb culture, because catacomb culture also had things like death masks, which you can see in the early Mycenaean beautiful gold masks everyone knows about. Those are probably a development of that earlier catacomb culture death mask. Should I turn on the recons again? Get these boys back. Look at them go. Round and round and round they go. Have we got any more? No. I'd also like to say that there are some interesting haplogroup information. There's some interesting haplogroup information to talk about. I'm showing the rivers. haplogroups. So the new Yamnaya samples, 181 new Yamnaya samples, all mostly R1b, the same variant which is not common in Western Europe now. It's a kind that's found mostly only in the Middle East, but Armenians often have it because Armenian languages come directly from Yamnaya. But that 125 have R1b variants. But the next biggest one after R1b is I2 lineages, which are associated with WHG, Western hunter-gatherers, which is very interesting. And I've also shared recently on my social media that some of the elite burials associated with the late Sredny Stog culture are carrying WHG lineages, I2 origin lineages, subclades. That's very interesting. It doesn't don't take it too far and say, oh, that means that. We can't take it too far and say, oh, the WHG dominated Yamna. I don't think that's nothing the case like that. That's not what I'm saying, but it does show that like this patriarchal culture had paternal origins of many of the elite burials at the early stage. The elite male had their ultimate origin in Western hunter-gatherers, which doesn't prove, but suggests it is possible that the ancestral language of Proto-Indo-Anatolian came from Western hunter-gatherers. And then all the people, a certain Western, some European chauvinists that I argued with, who were saying that, all Indo-European languages come from Western European hunter-gatherers. Someone said that to me. I thought it was ridiculous saying that in 2017. But they might actually be right. But it's impossible to know. We'll never know the answers to that because you're talking beyond actually a reconstructible language now. You can't really reconstruct any language earlier than Indo-European or Indo-Anatolian, so it's all completely speculative at that stage. There are also 3 R1A samples among the Yamnaya, which is interesting because the Yamnaya, that shows that Yamnaya did possess, there are some Yamnaya who had the R1A, which later became the haplogroup of the corded ware. So that would support, I suppose, Lazaridis' idea that he claims on Twitter that they were a lower less powerful tribe within this cultural sphere who later rose to prominence and displaced previous elites. And there are also a few Q1A and Q1B lineages which have their origin in Siberia for the north, and that'll be mediated via the EHG. So, yeah. So the R1B, the R1A, and the Q1 and the Q1B, those are all being mediated ultimately by EHG. So that's an argument that the predecessor of this language family is EHG origin, whereas the I2 is an argument that it could be Western hunter-gatherer origin. But there are also a very small minority of J-derived ones from the Caucasus, which could be used to argue for Lazaridis' preferred idea that they come from the south of the Caucasus. But going by numbers, it looks like the R1B and the I2 are the ones to look out for most. But yeah. Now, some of these samples, 4 of the R1B samples are not the R1B we normally associate with Yamnaya, and now as I say, associated with Armenians, but it's the R1B L51 haplogroup, supposedly. I've been told, and I can find one of them is I11838. Let me see if I can find it. Here it is, from the Russian Volga, early Bronze Age, and RL51. Here you go, RL51, RL51, RL51. These ones, Volga, early Bronze Age Romania, Russia Kalmykia, and Russia Don. Those all carry the L51, which is associated now with Western Europeans. That's the haplogroup that dominates, the subclade that became the dominant haplogroup of Western Europe. It's one that came into Rome, bringing Indo-European languages to Italy, to Britain. It's the one associated with the Celts, it's one that's present among Germanic people. It's the one that's present in Iberia when the bell beakers came into Iberia. So it's the European, it's the one that defines Europeans most clearly, especially Western Europeans, because Eastern Europeans are more R1A based. But that's very interesting. So the fact that that's present in Yamnaya as well also is interesting, but I don't know if it's an ancestral subclade exactly. So it doesn't actually prove that Yamnaya is ancestral to Belbeker. It's still not certain that Belbeker and corded ware, because Belbeker comes from corded ware, we know that. But whether corded ware came directly out of Yamnaya, I'm open to it being either, as Lazaridis claims, that Yamnaya is descended from, corded ware is descended from Yamnaya, or as Eurogenes David Wolski has said, that it's not, they're both they're brother and sister or whatever, and they both come from, they're brothers, and they come from Sredny Stog. But we'll see. That's a question that will be answered, I'm sure, as more data comes out. But yeah, and those are spread out quite a lot from, oh, sorry, I just realized I've still got the spinning blokes. Let me just get rid of them so you can see what I'm talking about. Here, look. You got, this one has L51. I'm on the way. Here I go. This one has L51. This one in Romania has L51. This one, Kalmykia, has L51. And this one from the Don, early Bronze Age. All Yamnaya. Very, very interesting. So this haplogroup information is fantastic. But what really surprised me is that I2 is such a dominant thing. Like, it's the later Indo-European haplogroups are really, really important. R1A. I mean, the two most successful Indo-European haplogroups are this L51R1B, which is thanks to the Belbekers, and R1A haplogroups, which is all thanks to corded ware. But in the early Bronze Age Yamnaya, those ones are very minor. They're not important at all. And I2 is important, which is not even like really associated with Indo-Europeans normally when people talk about it, because it's a WHG one, and it's also associated very much with the megalith culture in Western Europe, because as I said in my documentary about the origin of the megaliths, the megalithic people in northwestern France, it became dominant among the Anatolian immigrants who mixed with the Western hunter-gatherers there, and I2 lineages became very common all around Western Europe, from Spain up into Scotland. It was I2 dominated, but not the same I2 that you see here in the Yamnaya and the Sredny Stog. But what a turnout for the books, you know? It ain't over till the fat lady sings. There's so much interesting stuff that I didn't know was going to come out. Now, it's been an hour, but I could go a little bit longer if there's any questions. I'll just read through. Right. Maybe I'll read some of these other quotes that I got. Here's one. A more Western origin of the core Yamnaya would also bring their latest ancestors in proximity to the place of origin of the corded ware complex, whose origin is itself in question, but must have certainly been in the area of Central Eastern Europe occupied by the globular amphora culture west of the core Yamnaya. The corded ware population, which would trace a large part of its ancestry to the Yamnaya, was formed by admixture concurrent with the Yamnaya expansion. So here you go. Trace a large part of its ancestry to the Yamnaya, they say, based on another paper which made that claim based on IBD descent, which is not conclusive, really. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some more complicated scenario going on. CLV Cline people migrate. We propose the following hypothesis: that CLV Cline people migrated southwards around 4,400 BC, or about a millennium before the appearance of the Yamnaya, admixing with different substratum populations along the way, and then westwards before finally reaching central Anatolia. So they're not saying Yamnaya is the source of steppe ancestry in Anatolia. It's something before Yamnaya. Sredny Stog. We in fact find Y chromosome evidence that is consistent with the autosomal evidence. Sporadic instances of the steppe-associated Y chromosome haplogroup RV1636 in West Asia occurred at Arslan Tepe in eastern Anatolia and Kalavan in Armenia in the early Bronze Age, among individuals without detectable steppe ancestry. Let's go down. Here we go. Sredny Stog to Yamnaya, the transition. The growth from effective so they're saying it's just a few thousand people, not a lot of people. The Sredny Stog were largely formed by admixture before 4000 BC, 6,000 years ago, likely somewhere within the geographic span of the Dnipro-Don Cline. Half a millennium later, a subgroup of them developed cultural innovations that allowed them to... where's the rest of that? I lost it. They were all in order, but something happened with stupid Mac and... balls. Okay. The geographical homelands of the corded ware and Yamnaya would conceivably be in geographical proximity to allow for the synchronous emergence and shared ancestry. The Dnipro-Don area of the Sredny Stog culture fits the genetic data as it explains the ancestry of the nascent core Yamnaya and places them in precisely the area from which both corded ware and southeastern European Yamnaya in the west and the Don Yamnaya in the east could have emerged by admixture of the core Yamnaya with European farmers and UNHG respectively. That sounds good. A recent study proposed a much deeper origin. They're talking about of Indo-Anatolian IE languages. They're talking about Hegarty and colleagues. To 6,000 BC, 7,000 years ago, or about 2 millennia older than our reconstruction and the consensus of other linguistic studies. It's very important to understand that Hegarty and colleagues is not. It's a very, very, very novel language model which is completely out of sync with all other language models. And it's an experimental method, and it deliberately excludes all genetic and archaeological data from its calculations, and only then attempted to fit them with that after having come up with a model. So it shouldn't be used. It should be it should be ignored, in my opinion. But if you're going to look at it, it should be taken with a big pinch of salt. Hegarty and colleagues is very. It just doesn't match up anything. Yeah, the technical reasons for these older dates will doubtlessly be debated by linguists. From the point of view of archaeogenetics, we point out that the post-3000 BC genetic transformation of Europe by corded ware and beaker cultures on the heels of the Yamnaya expansion is hard to reconcile with linguistic split times of European languages consistently less than 4000 BC, as no major pan-European archaeological or migratory phenomena that are tied to the postulated South Caucasus Indo-Anatolian homeland around 6000 BC can be discerned. So yeah, the Hegarty thing is just not a good timeline. It doesn't work. These findings disprove theories that Kurgan... Oh, they also found, this is interesting, the genetic relationship between people in Kurgan cemeteries, like Barrow cemeteries, disprove theories that Kurgans were family tombs. Like when we see, and it compares them here to the Neolithic tombs that you see in, that started in Brittany. And then they specifically give the example of the ones in Hazelton Long Barrow in England and the Neolithic tombs in Ireland, because those are well sampled genetically, whereas the ones in France, the first ones in France actually, those where it's originate, are not well sampled, which is because of the French being weird. But yeah, those are all like quite closely related people in those tombs. And sometimes one tomb contains many generations of a family. That's not what the Indo-Europeans were like at all. These were not family tombs. Instead, the Kurgan cemeteries largely included individuals that were biological kin only in the sense of sharing common descent for a population, the same racial group, same tribe, that lived many centuries in the past. If there were kinship links within the same Kurgan, they were largely non-biological ones, like maybe like a kinsman or wife or something like that. So that's really interesting. But there are relationships between barrows. Like you can get barrows next to each other where the guys are related. That's well known. But they're definitely not family tombs. That's not how Indo-Europeans roll. The Indo-Anatolians must have been part of a CLV Cline, they say, Genetics has little to say whether within the CLV Cline, the Indo-Anatolian language was first spoken in the Caucasus end or of the Cline that spread into the steppe along with the spread of Caucasus ancestry, or vice versa, or even if a linguistic unity uncoupled with ancestry existed within the CLV continuum. So there's the pre-origin of Proto-Indo-European, even before Proto-Anatolian, is not shown. It can't be actually argued either way, according to the paper. But if you look at Lazaridis on Twitter, he's still trying to say that it's south of the Caucasus, but that's not what the paper's saying. DNA has traced back the ancestors of both Anatolian and Indo-European speakers to the part of the CLV Cline that was north of the Caucasus Mountains. So the actual point of dispersal for these languages and the genetic ancestry that's in common with all the Indo-Anatolian peoples is European. Bringing them, north of the Caucasus Mountains. North of the Caucasus Mountains. There we go. Had that bit. Oh, yeah, this is the final part of the paper, is it? Yeah, I'll come to that later. We find that Central Anatolian early Bronze Age peoples who were plausibly speakers of Anatolian languages based on their archaeological context were striking genetic outliers from their neighbours due to having a minority component of their ancestry from the CLV, plausibly from the people who brought the ancestral form of Anatolian languages to Anatolia. The majority of their ancestry from Mesopotamian Neolithic farmers and little or no ancestry from the Neolithic and Chalcolithic Anatolians who were overwhelming the sources populations of other early Bronze Age Anatolians. So this is why they support an eastern route for the migration of the steppe people into Anatolia, because if they'd gone the western route, they wouldn't have picked up this Mesopotamian ancestry. And my counter to that, and the reason why I still think the West, is that maybe it's not a very good counter. It's not like something that I suppose it's not something I can expect you to take very seriously. But it's basically, I just think that there could be another explanation for that Mesopotamian ancestry within picked up some other way, picked up later, and that they may have just missed the Western ancestry that is also present. But yeah, or maybe there's this combined model where there was a Western and an Eastern route. There were an intrepid group of people, those steppe herders. So maybe some went through the mountains and some went through the Balkans. What else we got? The archaeologically momentous expansion of the Kura-Araxes archaeological culture in the Caucasus and eastern Anatolia after 3000 BC may have driven a wedge between steppe and West Asian speakers of Indo-Anatolian languages, isolating them from each other and perhaps explaining their survival in Western Anatolia into recorded history. So this is their attempt to explain why Anatolian languages are more diverse in the west of Anatolia than in the east, since their idea that they came through the east doesn't work with that. So they're saying that's because there would have been more diversity of Anatolian languages in eastern Anatolia, but the Kura-Araxes culture, which is not Indo-European, expanded and replaced a lot of the eastern Anatolian speakers, and that meant the Anatolian language family was only given the opportunity to flourish in the western side of Anatolia. That's their argument. Not a bad argument. Early Bronze Age people who were plausibly speakers of Anatolian language based on their archaeological context were striking genetic outliers from their neighbours. Oh, I've done that one, haven't I? And okay, I'll finish off now with the last comment, which I really like. And I believe, I'm going to guess, that it comes from Frânculescu, who's a Romanian archaeologist, who's one of the people on the paper, because I've seen him say very similar things, and I quoted him saying something very similar in my Yamnaya documentary. But it says these groups are very diverse genetically. He's talking about the Iron Age steppe peoples, like the Sarmatians and the Scythians, who descend, of course, from Yamnaya, etc. They're very diverse genetically, but their Kurgans scattered across the steppe attest to the persistence of at least some elements of culture that began in the Caucasus-Volga area 7,000 years ago, before blooming in the Dnipro-Don area. 7,000 years ago. But they could say that in the Iron Age, but they could have given a better example of the Anglo-Saxons and Vikings, who had burial practices of the same type over 1,000 years after the Scythians ceased to exist. So they're really carried it on. There are Anglo-Saxon burials with, they're buried in a barrow with grave goods, with wolf teeth, like canid teeth necklaces, and pottery and grave goods and weapons. This is like on the medieval era, and it's carrying on something that existed 7,000 years ago on the steppe. But yeah, they give the example, less extreme example of Scythians, which is in the Iron Age. But anyway, I think that's because the Scythians and the Sarmatians actually dwelled in the same region as the Yamnaya had, as their ancestors had. So they're showing cultural continuity within the same region. But yeah, the actual longest lasting continuity of that archaeological tradition is not in the steppe where it originated, but in Northern Europe among Germanic people, Germanic pagans, and ended only with the introduction of Christianity. Into the Yamnaya culture verse. To what symbolic purpose did the Yamnaya and their precursors erect these mounds? We may not ever fully know. If they aimed to preserve the memory of those buried under them, of course they did. They did achieve their goal, as the Kurgans, barrows dotting the landscape of the Eurasian steppe, drew generations of archaeologists and anthropologists to their study and enabled the genetic reconstruction of their makers' origins presented here. Well, if you believe in fate as I do, and also these people worship their ancestors, like Indo-European cultures worship ancestors. So I think they knew exactly what they were doing when they were building these barrows. There's a reason why the barrow, I said in the Scythian documentary I made, the barrow is the center of the world for the Scythian. I said in my documentary about Germanic pagans, keep pushing it. The barrow is so much more than a burial monument. It's the center. It's the place where they had their legal assemblies. It was the parliament. It's the place where they communicated with the dead through necromantic rituals. It links the past to the future. It links the living to the dead. It's the center of their legal and religious life. And the barrow is a tradition now 7,000 years old, and it lasted, 6,000 years because it stopped about 1,000 years ago. But what an impressive run. Can you think of any other cultural tradition of such longevity? I want to write a book just about this barrow tradition and how it symbolizes the core of Indo-European belief and culture. No wonder that Maria Gibutas called them the Kurgan people. Here's another super chat from Liquid Oxygen. Unfortunately missed the bulk of this live, but thanks for covering this very interesting information, Tom. And thank you, Liquid. I'll finish off with one more little quote that I think's fun, but it's not from the paper. It's from a guy, a very popular genetics enthusiast, Davidsky of Eurogene's blog, and he says on his comments section, the only reason that the south of the Caucasus Indo-Anatolian hypothesis is still being considered is because it's appealing to many people for different reasons, including pure wishful thinking that the homeland not be placed in Eastern Europe. Quite so. They're going to have to come to terms with the fact that the Barrow boys were Europeans. With that, I thank you all for watching. Survive the Jive Talk. Don't forget to tune in next time.